Welcome back to Mom in Mind. I am your host, perinatal psychologist, Dr. Kat. We are going to be getting into some really important information on this episode today regarding couples transition into postpartum, into life with a baby, and what the new normal looks like and what it can look like. There's a lot of difficulties that come up in the transition to parenthood, some that take us by surprise, some that are expected. But what is really important and what you will hear throughout this episode is how important communication is. That can be a hard leap for some people, but it really is that important. And to share all of this really important info with us is Catherine O'Brien. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and founder of happywithbaby.com. She created Happy with Baby in order for new parents to discover the advice she wishes she could have had as a parent. She is currently living and practicing in Sacramento, California, and can be found at Happy with Baby on her website, on Instagram, and on Facebook. And to boot, her new book, also entitled Happy with Baby, is a really fantastic resource for couples who are transitioning into life as new parents. All right, let's get into all of this good stuff and meet Catherine O'Brien. Hey, Catherine, thank you so much for being with us again. I'm really excited to have you on and talk about this awesome book that you wrote and all of the amazing work that you're doing. I think so many people need this kind of support, so I'm really glad to have a chat with you and find out what couples are going through in the transition to parenthood.
Well, I'm so happy to be here and be back with you.
It's awesome. Super fun. I'm trying to think of like the first time we met, and it feels like it was a while back.
Yeah.
Maybe in San Diego, at the PSI conference or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Anyways, it's been a minute.
Yes.
And in that time, you've really grown doing a lot for couples. And I know you and your husband run a couples workshop, and you've been doing that for how long again?
For over 12 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so amazing.
Like, I don't know. My son is going to turn 13 in less than 30 days. And so I'm just like, how is that even a possibility? I don't know.
Time is weird. It's extra weird right now too.
Yes, extra.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So you've been running that for a long time, and you guys put all of that knowledge into your book, Happy with Baby, and I have it here. It's awesome. And your husband was able to give some perspective in there too about stuff, but this is like really a lot of your clinical knowledge stuff you've seen over years and years, and now put into a book so that folks can have that support at home too.
Yes.
It's really awesome. So, so in terms of today, let's get into that. Let's talk about the transition to parenthood, and really specifically, for moms and then for the couple. So what are you finding? Well, I guess maybe I'll start with some of the things you see in your workshop. What are the things that people are coming in kind of, struggling with or wanting to figure out?
Yeah. So typically we can get, we have people that they're expecting, and then we also have couples that are, have a baby, usually up to a year postpartum, that will come. And so usually the couples that are expecting, they've heard from their friends like, oh, this is hard. Or, now we've been doing it so long, we'll get referrals from friends of friends, which is that's always good.
Yeah.
But, it is like, what are we in for? We want to make sure our relationship stays strong. Like, how are we going to manage like all of, everything from like, laundry and feedings and what to do about like sleepless nights, and then dealing with family members and stuff. And then also like the ultimate thing is like, how are we keeping that intimacy in our own relationship? And, for the couples that are already postpartum, like maybe they are struggling, with the communication and not realizing really what the impact was going to be, which is why I came up with a workshop to begin with, because I did not realize the impact having a baby would have on my relationship with my husband. So usually that's what it is. And just kind of like the reinforcement of like, yeah, you are doing so much right, but it's like a really hard time period. It's like it takes a lot out on us. And I think, we hear so often like, oh, it's such a wonderful time, enjoy every moment, and all those things, that I feel like we're setting families up for failure or feel
Yeah.
failures, like feeling like, oh, why is everybody else having an easy time, which they're not, but it can look like that or feel like that. And so just wanting to give like perspective, like these are the things, these are what you have ahead, but this is how you can kind of combat it, and like tools you can have in place, like a postpartum plan, is what we usually call it. So
Yeah, that's really important stuff. Do you find that people are surprised a lot at how much their relationship is impacted?
um are they surprised? Like, I think sometimes, yeah, sometimes they're really surprised, like, oh, I didn't realize it, or I thought, maybe my partner would be more supportive, or sometimes they're surprised like their partner is as supportive as they are,
Mm.
or
Mhm,
like in
mhm,
different ways, and it's like
mhm,
recognizing the things that they are doing. Because I think partners are much more supportive than they were in the past. Like there's a
mm,
lot
mhm.
that really step up, and I think it's like figuring out how you each can recognize what the other person is doing, and that it is going to be different, for each of you. So
Yeah, for sure. In that first bit of time, in the early postpartum, when
mhm,
everything's new, bodies are healing and recovering,
mhm,
everyone's exhausted. It can feel really disorienting. It
yes,
can be really hard to like figure out even what you're doing, and a lot of
mhm,
people end up feeling obviously like overwhelmed. And
mhm.
some people definitely are feeling like, "What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing." In terms of that transition, how are you seeing people move through that and get to a place where they feel better about it and feeling empowered, and they can help themselves like transition to a place where they feel like they know what they're doing?
uh well, so I mean, I think one of the hardest parts, right, with the pandemic is that the support, it's been harder to find the support, or like the people like
Mhm,
coming to you for a
mhm,
large period of time. It was like having that. And I think when they start to like reach out for support and have a better support system, and seeing like, oh, like some of this is normal for a lot of different people, it starts to like kind of like, okay, like I can do this, like other people are doing this,
mhm,
and here's some easier ways, or like, listening to what other people are saying, it's like, oh, this is how they're doing it, like,
for sure.
oh, this might be easier for me. Where I think sometimes when, and I'm sure you saw this as well, like in those early, months, like they're just like in it, and there's like no one reinforcing like what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how to like support them in that. And I think that was a really, really difficult time. And I think, just reinforces how difficult, how important it is that we need support
Yeah.
postpartum,
Yeah.
but than just our partner.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's a lot of pressure on the relationship, which I want to get to in just a second. But like, yeah, to your point, I was talking with a mom the other day who, without being in like a group of other moms or talking to
Mhm.
other moms, was kind of didn't realize that she could do some of the things that other moms were
Mhm.
doing. Like, oh, you can like take your baby to Target and like those kinds of
Yes.
things that
Yes.
it made her realize a little bit of how anxious she was to do
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
it's really hard to have any of that perspective without, what you're talking about, getting some outside, yeah, perspective.
Perspective. Yeah.
Mm,
That's exactly
mhm,
what I was going to say. Because I think it is like we need that reinforcement. We need that encouragement. We need that
mhm.
support. We need that, you know, uh, yeah, all of those things.
Yeah, for sure. Right. So that's where like community and being in touch
Mhm.
with other people is so super important. But,
Mhm.
I mean, I think we hear it all the time how hard it is to be like honest and real with other moms sometimes.
Yeah.
Other people in general, not even just moms, like sometimes our own parents or
Right. Like
our own
asking for
friends.
help is a huge challenge. Like is if
Mm,
we're admitting like we can't do it when
mhm.
it's not like we can't just do it like on our own. Like it's hard. It takes a toll if we do, you know.
Yeah, big time. For sure. And for people who feel like they're supposed to do it on their own and
Hmm.
shouldn't ask for help, it's really rough because
Yeah.
like at the same time you like desperately need rest and a
Hmm.
break, and it feels too hard to ask for
Yeah.
help.
Right.
Do you ever see that within couples?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it can be help. It can be hard to ask. And sometimes it's hard to ask if they feel like their partners, like their job is hard or they have
Mm,
a lot of pressure. Like maybe they have, that comes up often, like, oh, they have, they're struggling there, like they have family stuff going on or they've got a big project at work or something. And I don't want to burden them with what I'm going through or
mm,
that I'm
mhm.
having a hard time
Yeah.
because I don't want to add more pressure or stress
Mhm.
on them.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I mean, I hear this a lot. Maybe you do too.
Hmm.
It's easier if I just do it.
Yes.
Like that kind of
Maybe
phrase
immediately
comes up. Yeah.
easier, but
Right.
long term, it's not easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you
No.
speak to that a little bit? Like, well, why long term is it not easier to like ask for help from your partner?
Because, well, for a lot of things, I think we can get resentful. Like if we don't ask for help and then they don't do stuff because they don't know what kind of support or help that we need, or we're always like kind of, going, stepping in and doing whatever.
Mm,
But we can get resentful towards them because then it's like they're doing less. And sometimes and this is what I'll hear from the partners, they feel like, well, they never let me. So, they stop asking or they stop, putting, moving towards. Um, I think it can be difficult. It's physically, it can be, exhausting, like, especially if you're getting up all night long or you're doing all the feedings, you're doing all the changings. And let's be honest, like the moms are usually have their own jobs and, other things that they're doing too. I feel like I hear that a lot right now. It's like people are still working from home and, maybe they have like a nanny or the baby's in daycare or whatever for part of the time, but then there's always like an overlap where they're still trying to do some work and take care of their children and keep the house and everything. And you know, they're not asking for help or their partner's not hearing that this is a challenge for them and can be like really frustrating and cause arguments and uh, sometimes their partner doesn't even realize what is happening if they're not being clear about what they need or what the impact is on them, especially if they're always like stepping in and trying to take care of it.
yeah. I mean, that creates like a really difficult dynamic. Because like the thing that you don't want, if you're the person who's needing help but not asking for
Mhm.
help or stepping in, it you're getting less and less of what you need over time.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh, that's really tough. Hmm. Yeah, that I mean that resentment is really toxic over time to the
Right.
relationship too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I always like think of it as like this wall of like resentment that
Mm,
goes up between the two of you. And then it gets to a point where like you can't even like see each other. So if you want to, you know, work on it, like you're going to have to tear down that wall, which is a
mhm,
lot of work and repair and everything
mhm,
to actually get to each other and start
mhm.
like connecting and feeling like, you're in this together. So, like I've had couples that are like, oh, well, after when the baby's a year old, like it'll be easier. So then and I'm like, it doesn't get easier because then you're dealing with like all the frustration that you have for each other. And then you have to heal that first, you know and then sometimes another baby comes along and how are you managing that, and so sometimes we get couples like in our workshop that is their second baby and they're like, we don't want it to be as difficult the second time around, you know so we want to have some things in place and like figure out like how are we communicating better with each other in a way that we can hear what the other person's saying.
Right. So that resentment is on both sides too. It's not just like, the primary caregiver,
Right.
but like the partner also. What are you seeing on the other side of the person who's like not necessarily the primary
Mhm.
caregiver in terms of resentment?
Yeah. Well, I think they can feel like their partner isn't interested in them, like is always
Mm,
about the children. And so they feel like that less connection and like, oh, the kids come first,
mm,
um, or whatever, or like, you're too tired to even like do anything with me at the end of the day. And that can feel, a lot of can build that resentment. Uh, and I think sometimes just even like the way, communication can be hard because one person might be shorter with the other person because they're frustrated and they're tired because they're
yeah.
doing a lot of stuff. And then it's like, well, I don't even want to talk to you because
Hmm.
the way you talk to me doesn't feel good or doesn't sound good, or like every time I say something it's wrong, or has a tone to it that doesn't feel good.
Right. So, I mean, over time, that's gonna be harder and harder and harder.
Mhm.
And for people who are listening and kind of maybe like wondering if they're having this resentment or building it, like what are things that they could notice internally that might help them
Mhm.
realize like, oh, maybe I am resentful.
Mm. Um, so one of the things like I always notice that when um like my husband frustrates me, like if everything he does is annoys me or I find frustrating, like from, I'm standing in the kitchen doing something and I feel like he's always in my way, or like
Mm,
he doesn't wipe, my big one is like he doesn't wipe the water off the sink after he washes his hands or whatever, like, and
right.
I don't always notice those things. Like those are
Mhm.
like a rarity now because we have worked a lot on our, but it's like I know that like if he does things that annoy me or just the way, he answers things or, does things with the kids, then I'm like, okay, what's going on that I'm finding him so frustrating? And usually it comes back to like not feeling connected, not feeling like somehow supported. And that means that clues into me like I need to communicate with him better. We need to have like some one-on-one time. We need to get on the same page. Or maybe like I'm like feeling overworked and why is that? And do I need to ask him for more support in some areas? That could very well be it as too. So
Yeah, those little bits. I love how you're describing kind of like noticing how you're feeling, checking
mm-hmm,
in with yourself about what that is.
mm-hmm,
And I'm assuming that's a lot of what you guys talk about too. And
mm-hmm.
and how to stay connected. Because
Yeah,
there's, a million and a half ways you could feel disconnected.
right.
Like from tiredness, being tired,
Yeah,
feeling overwhelmed, and not having time together, like,
right.
all of these things. What are what are ways that people could start, like if they're worried about having that conversation about, oh, I'm
Mm-hmm,
starting to like not feel connected to you.
mm-hmm,
What are
mm-hmm.
ways that people can start having that conversation?
Well, I always encourage my couples to like find the moments, like the small moments to do like quick check-ins with each other like every day, like, how's the day going, or even like acknowledging to each other like ways that you do feel supported or what you feel like is going well, because there usually are those things.
Mm,
When we feel more anger or resentment, it's harder to see that, but usually I'm like
mm,
there are some things. So if we can like look at like, oh, look at the things that they do that help make my life easier and try to
mhm,
build on that. um but I think it's to have those little check-ins like, hey, I'm struggling with this, and maybe it's not even like with a relationship necessarily, but I'm really struggling with like how I'm getting the kids like all the things I have to do
mm.
in the morning, or I'm struggling with like my balance of work and home, and and then you can welcome them into like how can they help support you with that, because it's not saying like you're not doing this, so this is how you're failing me. It's saying like, no, I need help. And maybe, I mean, this happens to me all the time. I don't know if this happens for you, but with with my partner, it's like if I say something and I'll be like, oh, I have da 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 da, and then he'll be like, well, why do you have all those things? And then it's like these, sometimes these internal pressures like I have added for myself, and then
Right.
he can help me like shift the perspective, and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I don't have to do that. These like timelines or dates or deadlines that I set for myself are like unrealistic, or it's like, well, why didn't you say like I can do this? Like you didn't even ask me. I'm more than happy to like pick this up, and
Mhm.
help you, take the kids to wherever they have to go. And it's like, oh, yes, you're right. I guess I could have asked. But like sometimes,
Right.
I start
Yeah.
to think I have to do all of the things.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I totally know what you're talking about. I think it's really easy to just start like
Mhm,
noticing all the things that need to get done
mhm,
and just start doing them,
mhm.
and kind of get in that momentum.
Right.
But yeah, for sure. It's really nice to have somebody kind of on the outside of your head to be like, you
Yes.
really don't need to say yes to that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Or
yeah.
like, I like to tell couples is like do like check-ins and where you're looking at the calendar for the things coming up. Because my thing is,
Mm,
oh, I scheduled the dentist, the orthodontist, the doctor's appointment or whatever. And then I just kind of assume then I'm taking,
yeah.
or then I
Uh,
feel the pressure that I have to take them. And
mm,
he's like, no, you just tell me, like I can, whatever, take some time off work or do whatever and help you do that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So just because I like scheduled it doesn't mean I have to do it all too.
for
They work
sure.
together. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to like look at, check in on those schedules and look at those things and see how you can help each other out.
Yeah, for sure. I'm thinking about, especially in the kind of early months of
Mhm.
having a baby, is um I'm in one of your the title of one of your chapters is a new normal.
Mhm.
And I love that because that's like in this transition, you are really trying to figure out what the new
Mhm.
normal is. And if you are kind of in your head with all of these things that
Mhm.
you're just describing, all the things you need to do, like doctor's appointments and whatnot, it can, and you're used to just like handling stuff, let's say like
Mhm.
pre
Right.
baby, you just do what you need to do for yourself. And if you're making those appointments, yeah, people might be feeling like they're the one who has to do everything. But
Mhm.
if you're creating a new normal with your
Mhm.
partner, that's going to look very different. And if you're not communicating about that, which is essentially like what you're saying, how important communication is,
Right.
that new normal is going to feel terrible, if
Yes.
you're taking everything on.
Right.
Um, and I'm thinking like, well, like where does resentment, if
Mhm.
somebody's already not feeling anxious and depressed
Mhm.
already,
Right.
resentment over time can lead to that,
Right. Right.
feeling that overwhelm and stress for that long
Right.
period of time.
Because if we know that when we have a good, our relationship helps us in with the depression and anxiety, right? Like if we have a good support system
Mm,
and, or I guess I should say like a risk factor of, depression, anxiety is like marital conflict and stuff. So it's
mm.
like if we like work on that too, I think it's so important.
So for people who are like absolutely overwhelmed and feeling
Hmm.
anxious and feeling depressed and
Hmm.
are also thinking like, how am I going to work on my relationship? Like I
Yes.
can barely get sleep. I
Yes.
think maybe you alluded to this a little bit with like the little check-ins or
Hmm.
the shorter stuff. What are some
Yeah.
other kind of tangible things that you've seen people do or you help people do
Yeah.
to deal with trying to stay connected during all of this overwhelm?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Like the little check-ins and breakdown, like what is it that I really need? And it's like sleep. Like,
Mhm.
oftentimes, especially if you have a baby that's waking up multiple times a night and when we're not getting sleep, again, that like leads to the mood and anxiety disorders. It's like, okay, we've got to like break it down. Like, how am I going to get more sleep? Like, I need
Mhm.
help. How can you support me? How can we, change our like schedule a little bit that I can get a longer chunk of sleep, especially if you're breastfeeding or something, or like how can we do that? How can we manage that because the way it's working isn't working? And I always like to say like this isn't forever. Like this, like you go to bed early, I stay up late or whatever. like we don't get to connect at night, like that won't be like that forever. It's like a period of time until, you know, the baby's sleeping longer and I can get a more regular, you know, sleep. But that, I think that is an important thing to focus on. Like, how do we take the overwhelm? Like, if you're so overwhelmed, it is like, I can't even work on my relationship. It's like, okay, well, how do we like break things down and make it and do work on one thing at a time? And I think like sleep is always, to me, like the number one thing, because it can affect so much. Like, I know when I don't get enough sleep, like
Blacked out.
I mean, I don't even know how I survived this. Like,
I know.
the two
Same.
pregnancies and postpartum, like, but we did it much better the second time because I did figure out how to get extra sleep, and it was so much easier, and my mood was better in that regard and everything. So
yeah, same. Same. Yeah, sleep is so important. For sure. And people, I don't, you wouldn't necessarily say like, oh, me getting sleep is going to help me feel more connected to my partner, but it does. Not in a direct way, but because you have more patience, you feel supported. Like there's so many things that go into that sleep equation. So going kind of back a little bit to early postpartum, what and specifically staying connected regarding intimacy. And I'm not even talking about sex specifically, just closeness, because of all of the things you've already described that kind of get in the way of that. One of them is how you may be feeling about your own body and your own body in relation to your partner sometimes too. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit to that space of transitioning into life with a new relationship with your body?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is a huge issue oftentimes for women, especially if we've had like some body, issues with our how we perceived our body prior to having a child, and then our body does not look the same, it doesn't feel the same, and sometimes when our partner touches us, that doesn't feel the same, and it can be uncomfortable, and so I think, again, this is where the communication is important, because we need to share like where we're at and how we're feeling, and when we're wanting to be intimate, like especially in those early months, what felt good previously might not feel good right now, and how do we talk about that, or how do we navigate that together, instead of like just shutting the door and not having anything, because we're not feeling good in our body, but then we put that wall up or shut the door or whatever, and then our partners like can feel rejected too, and like I hear this a lot, like, well, they're not even interested in me anymore, where oftentimes that's not the case. There's more to it going on. So it's like, okay, let's talk about that, let me help support you, like what do you need, and what is happening with your body, and is it normal stuff, or is there are things that maybe need to be checked out or talked to by a doctor, pelvic floor type stuff or whatever that is. So which I know we don't talk about enough, and I think I'm hearing about it more and more, which makes me excited. But like, women just kind of, will just accept things and think that like, this is how it's supposed to be, this is what happened, I had a baby, and it's like, we don't have to necessarily accept everything being uncomfortable or not feeling right. So
yeah, and that's like a whole other episode.
that is a whole other episode.
Just the amount of stuff that we kind of put up with and think we have to put up with in terms of how our body feels, and people discounting us and whatnot. Okay, I can't go down that road because I might just go off. It makes me so angry. So that we'll save that for another time. But so you were describing, I think, something that really important that I want to highlight is that that internal stuff, the stuff we're feeling internally, our partners might not know that we feel that way. So then all they are doing is interpreting it as sometimes just rejection.
Right.
just straight rejection when, let's just say in this case, the mom who's feeling that
Mhm.
way, might just be so overwhelmed with how
Yeah.
she's feeling. But again, back to that communication.
Yeah.
Man, a lot can be assumed,
Yes.
and incorrect assumptions, but if you don't have
Right.
anything to go on, yeah, we just start telling stories to
Yeah.
ourselves.
Right. Well, and I think something like I struggled with was, and you kind of had said this before, like we're so used to doing things that we need to do, or, and if we've been in our relationship long enough, we've kind of like learned how to, do things, and a lot of things that we
Mhm.
don't communicate about. And I think having the baby, all of a sudden, it's like we have to communicate about everything, or
Wow.
you end up feeling like overwhelmed. And so it's like, okay, like how do we go from like, oh, we've learned how to manage and we don't need to, I don't have to talk to my husband about getting my hair done until like the baby's here. And now I'm like, oh wait, like who's watching the baby? Am I going at this time? There's a lot of
Mhm.
navigating, whereas before it's like I didn't have to navigate the things I did for myself. And it changed postpartum. So
Sure.
now I feel like I'm communicating about everything, or I don't want to because I don't want to have to ask, or I don't want to have to, and then that causes like conflict and stuff. But it's like, it's not like necessarily asking, it's more like, okay, how are we navigating this together?
Ooh, that's really important. Yeah, because that sucks to feel like you're like, quote unquote, asking for permission to go
Yes,
like
yes.
whatever, get your hair done or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
And he
Um,
hates it when it's like sounds like an ask.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it is like, it's like I'm asking like how we're going to manage the schedule, not necessarily like for permission to do
Permission,
this,
right, right, for sure. Yeah. But that kind of stuff can really get in the way of intimacy
Yeah.
too. Like, I mean, all of this, not
Yes.
communicating,
Yeah.
all of it ends up getting in the way of closeness,
Right.
and feeling connection. Um, and then going back to the body stuff, really specifically, if somebody's
Hmm.
feeling like their body has
Yeah.
changed in ways that makes them feel uncomfortable,
Right. Right.
um, sometimes people are making assumptions that like, oh, if I don't feel good about my body,
Mm.
then my partner must not
Right.
either.
Right.
When oftentimes that's not the case.
Absolutely.
Do you see
Yeah.
that a lot?
Oftentimes they're, oh yeah. Yeah. And I was talking to a couple one day, and she just started crying when he was like, I can't, like, well, he was so upset to hear how she perceived herself, and then the tears. And I was just like, yeah, like neither one of them knew what was going on in their own heads, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
he hurt for the thought that she would think so poorly of herself. And then for her to hear him say, like, oh my gosh, you look, I like as if nothing had ever changed,
Right,
like
right,
you
right.
are, and maybe more amazing because you just gave birth to a baby, like your
How
body,
about that?
how awesome are you, so.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good one.
Mhm.
Um, right. Yeah. Some partners do have some really newfound respect for,
Mhm.
birth, or
Yeah.
what their partner's body can do, and all of that. That's a
Mhm.
really good point.
Mhm.
Um, it's, yeah, I guess kind of all of this comes back to communication,
Right.
trying to not make assumptions about,
Mhm.
what your partner is thinking or feeling. And that's
Right.
on both sides.
Right.
Um, yeah. Man, it can get really dicey in there without the
Yeah.
communication. That seems to
Yeah.
be the thing that holds everything together.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's just even sometimes it's even simply communicating like, oh my gosh, things are so different. Like, how are we doing? It's so different for
Yeah.
both of us. It's
Hmm.
plain and simple. Like, how are we doing? How are we managing this? And it is a new normal, but it's like sometimes it can be an even better normal once you figure out like, you get on the right road together. Like sometimes, you have to smooth the road out a little bit, but it can get better. And it's, you can still do the same things you used to do. It just might look a little bit different. And what were those things that you really enjoyed doing together? And how did you spend time together? And how can you start, incorporating some of those things, maybe not in the big ways you did before, but in like smaller ways.
For sure. So, in terms of, you said many times how important even just like small check-ins are.
Mhm.
Is there anything any advice, I guess, you could give to people who want to do something like that? How
Mhm.
to how to make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks.
Mhm.
Because in the busyness of all of this, it'd be really easy to
Yeah.
not check in.
Yeah, I would try to. I think it's like if you can pick the time of day that you're going to do it. And,
Mm,
I do, ideally it's the same time every day, but people have different kinds of schedules. So, it could be like, oh, we had our check-in today. And it's like, okay, let's look at our calendar. What's a good time tomorrow according to plan, and then
mhm.
like, how can you do it? Is it like, you know, it's hard, if you have kids running around, but it's like, oh, if we go for a walk and then we're pushing them a stroller, like maybe we can do a check-in that way, or they're playing here, doing their thing, and like, let's have a quick check-in, or like right when they go to bed, or maybe I mean, this was never us, but maybe your kids sleep in long enough that you can get up early and have a cup of coffee together and have a check-in. Or maybe it's even like on a lunch break and you're not in the same place, but you hop on the phone or FaceTime or whatever, and you check in with each other. You like finding those little times. And it's like, I mean, ideally 10 to 15 minutes, but sometimes you don't have that much time. So it's shorter, but you add that time up over the course of a week and month, and any of those minutes like count for something.
Yeah. I love that you're breaking it down into those like little bite-size
Mhm.
kind of pieces, because it can, I think it could feel really overwhelming to feel like,
Yeah.
oh, we gotta like set aside all this time and I don't have time.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna sit down with like a pad up, like I feel like it doesn't
Right.
have, it's like, how do you get the nothing like that? It's nothing
Uh-huh.
like that. I
Doesn't
mean,
have to be
ideally once
formal.
you're looking at your calendars and maybe you're writing things down, but the little
Mhm.
check-ins, like even if it's something as simple as like, hey, you're scheduled to do this, or are you still getting home earlier? Are you still working late? Like, checking in about those kind of things.
For sure. Just to know that you're both going in the same direction, on the same
Right,
page.
right,
Um, and if there's time, then kind of seeing how each other is doing, how everyone's
right,
coping. Yeah,
right.
it's really, really important. So communication, communication, communication. And then
And
uh
then more.
right, but right, it doesn't have to take up your whole life, like 10
Right.
minutes just to
And it
see.
could be like fun things, like communicating
Mhm.
about the things that you like to do, or like, making a list of things like, okay, when we have more time, when we have a babysitter or whatever, like let's make our bucket list of things that we want to do together. Or like,
Mm,
oh, I thought I saw this new restaurant. Like, let's check that out the next time we have it. And like write these things down. So when you have those opportunities to have those dates and stuff, you can remember it. Cause I feel like I'm usually like, oh, I saw this, that looks good. And then it's like comes time to go do something. It's like, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do?
for sure.
It's like, let me go back
Oh,
to the list that we've been creating, or
oh
like
yeah.
we want to go away, eventually, for a weekend somewhere or something like that. Like put start making those lists. So it's like, oh yeah, this is how we want to, enjoy our time together and have fun, or, trying something new or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, thanks for bringing that in, because yeah, it doesn't have to be just all about business and
Yeah.
serious and all of that. Oh, I love that. Yeah, you're so right about writing down things, because like that foggy headedness and
Yes.
memory, like not being able
Yeah.
to remember stuff is so real
Hmm.
when especially in those early months.
Hmm.
But let's be honest, like it's a little bit hard these days in general.
Yes. Yes. It
All
really
this
is.
stress we're
Well,
going through.
right.
Yeah. So this is hopeful. This feels hopeful, like that people don't have to feel disconnected.
Hmm.
There's this path that
Right.
you're offering them.
Right. And I mean, it takes work, right? Like we know
Hmm.
all relationships, as good as they are, take work. But it's
Right.
like, even if it's like you're in that place postpartum and you're really struggling and it feels like, oh my gosh, what happened to our relationship? It doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to feel this hard. It's just finding, let's find those little ways to like reconnect with each other and make that time. And though it's harder to, because time is less abundant, it is possible just to do it.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on and giving us all of these good tips. And I know that there are a lot more in your book, Happy with Baby. And I hope that everyone can go grab a copy and have this. It's accessible. and it gives really good examples of what happens for couples and how to cope and deal. And I just think it's such a fabulous resource for families out there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you on, and someday we'll have you on again with your next book. Huh?
Maybe like 10 years as well.
Oh,
I feel like how long it took me to write this one.
Yeah, it's tough business. Yeah, I appreciate how hard it is to write a book, and it's such an awesome resource. So thanks
Thank you so
again
much.
so much.